she was right. And so it's confusion just seems to be the rule of the day. And this is why, when St. Paul talks about with all humility and gentleness, I have to take the lead in being humble. And sometimes humility says, when you're wrong, just say, I was wrong. I was wrong. So if you find me talking about something that you didn't hear about in the lessons, I'll get to the lessons. I'll get to the lessons. What I prepared to do was talk again about the miracle of the loaves and fishes. And as it turns out, that's what happened directly before Jesus walked on the water. And so let's see how it leads into this business of walking on the water. Now, let me ask you, have you ever felt yourself absolutely overwhelmed by events? Have you ever felt like, oh my God, life has just changed, just completely. And you begin to feel so stressed out, you don't know if you can even breathe. Now, the research on stress is getting really interesting because what they're finding out is that 90% of all visits to the doctor's office can be attributed directly or indirectly to stress. Stress is really hard on us. Researchers have found that stress not only keeps us awake at night, which makes us irritable, but it also suppresses the immune system. And so when you really get stressed out, you get sicker. And of course, when you get sick, that adds to your level of stress. And so it's just kind of a downward cycle that just starts to consume you. So what do you do when you feel absolutely overwhelmed? Well, a rule I've learned about stress really helps. If you don't manage the stress will manage you. And so the first thing I tell people who tell me they're stressed out is, are you getting any exercise? Now, Jesus has 3 suggestions for us in this miracle of the loaves and fishes that can help us with stress. The first thing he says is, have everybody sit down. I never thought about that. When I get really stressed out, I get a little bit manic. I want to call all my friends one after another to tell them I'm stressed out. It doesn't help. I think if I just sit down and calm down and focus. There's this interesting piece of research on flies. That if you want to catch a fly, use both hands. Because the fly's brain can only deal with one thing approaching it at a time. And so if you go at it with one hand, the little computer inside its head calculates its takeoff angle and it gets away. But when there are 2 things coming at it, that little computer can't manage all that information, and it just kind of locks up, and you can catch the fly. When you get stressed out, you have too many things coming at you. So the thing to do is sit down and focus. Focus on what's the most important thing. What do I really need to do to solve this or to make it better? Now, here are Jesus and the disciples out in the wilderness. They went there to get some rest. And when they get to the other side, they find 5,000 people waiting for them. 5,000 men, not counting the women and children. Let's say 10,000 people are waiting for them. Have you ever opened the front door in the evening and found unexpected dinner guests arriving? Well, what do you do with 10,000 unexpected dinner guests? Call McDonald's? Call Sonic? Well, they didn't have them. And Jesus says, where should we find bread for all of these people? Well, St. Philip doesn't have a solution. He answers 8 months' wages wouldn't be enough to buy bread for each one to have a bite. Well, then Andrew speaks up. And Andrew says in the Gospel of St. John, here is a boy with 5 small barley loaves and 2 small fish. How far will they go among so many? And that's when Jesus says, have the people sit down. And they did. And Jesus takes the bread and the fish, and he gives thanks and distributes it to those who were seated, and he gave them as much as they wanted, and he did the same thing with the fish. And when they had all had enough to eat, he said to his disciples, gather the pieces that are left let nothing be wasted. And the disciples gathered them up, and there were 12 baskets of leftovers. See, the Lord provides. The Lord provides. Even out in the middle of chaos, out in the middle of nowhere, the people left the city because they could not be fed in the city. The Pharisees and Sadducees were not doing the job. And we have people leaving the Episcopal Church in almost every diocese because they are not being fed and cared for. Now, in our adult class this morning, we're going to look at a letter from Father Dow Sanderson, who's rector of the Church of the Holy Communion in Charleston, South Carolina, because that's a parish where the people are being fed. And the Diocese of South Carolina is the only diocese in the church right now that's growing. And I'm doing everything I can to get the bishop who set that up to come to Mississippi to talk to us about how they did it. Because if they can grow, we can grow. And the people go out to be fed because they know Jesus gives them what they need to live. And they were fed. And they were all satisfied. Now, one of the incorrect things we do when we find ourselves facing all sorts of stressors, one of the things that we do in the church often is to say, well, we can't afford this. And there's a guy named William Easom who's dedicated his life to helping churches and helping them grow. And Easom wrote a book called Sacred Cows Make Gourmet Burgers. Sacred Cows Make Gourmet Burgers. And he begins his first chapter with these words: established churches worship at the feet of the sacred cow of control. And one of the most controlling statements we make is, we can't afford it. We can't, and this echoes what St. Philip said to Jesus, that there wasn't enough money to buy food for all the people that needed it. We can't do that because we don't have enough money. Or we can't do that because we don't have the leaders. Or we can't do that because we're just ignorant country people. Or we can't do that because we've never done it that way. And what we're really saying is, this isn't important enough for us to do anything different. When I was a college student, I heard a lecture by an incredible architect named Paolo Soleri. And maybe some of you have heard of him. Paolo Soleri designed megastructures. He would take the Hoover Dam and put a city into it. He would go into the desert southwest and build a city into a mesa. Well, an hour after his lecture, I got on the elevator at the Union at Iowa State, and the door, just before the door closed, somebody got on with me, and it was Paolo Soleri. And being who I am, I was going to ask him questions. I said, well, Mr. Soleri, that's very interesting, but how do we pay for it? And he looked at me and he just blew me off like that. He said, oh, people always do what they want.